my lens is really, in the past few years, has been very sustainability focused. And in my more recent experience, I've really had the pleasure of trying to build some tools that will help the Indigenous communities foster building code. I've had a chance to really take a deep dive into the impact of legislation on the First Nations, how that is translated into the housing. So we've seen some conditions that my mission right now is to see how we can influence and educate and improve sustainability in those communities. So for today, I just want to talk about the role of the codes. I'll talk about a brief review of the legislative framework that surrounds building code. We'll talk about adoption and compliance of the National Building Code and about the process of a First Nation enforcing the code. A couple of the other things that we'd like to do, we just want to talk about building science as it relates to the energy code, and this really goes to your presentation this morning. There's some principles of science that are applied in the NECB, so I think it's an interesting thing to look at. Talk a little bit about the community benefits of adopting code. I want to do a couple interactive sessions just to talk about the process of adopting code and maybe learn some ideas from everyone here today about how we might help the communities adopt code. And our last three, I want to talk a little bit about the legislation of land code. It's a very complex topic, fascinating topic, but I think it's really important in that only a quarter of the First Nations in Canada have adopted the sovereign right to govern themselves. So we really want to encourage self-governance. And then again, we'll go back to the community benefits. I think it's very important. And the second interactive session, just to talk about some of the barriers and how we as a community might help overcome those barriers to adopting code. So today we're funded by Natural Resources Canada and the fine folks at Eco Canada. This program is part of the Building Codes Adoption Accelerator program. So it is about education and sharing information, trying to help First Nations adopt code. So we're really proud to be part of that. Oh, so I didn't go back to me. I should talk about me for a second. I'm Ward Woolgar. I am the founder of Decarb Inc., short for decarbonization because I'm a geek. I can't help myself. I've been in the building operations, construction, operation, what have you, for 35 years. I've had an amazing, blessed career to get to work on some massive projects, some impactful projects. I've done everything from little tiny mechanical retrofits to $285 million projects, and in that span you get to do some really amazing work. I've been lucky enough to get, as the session talked about this morning, I got to use machine learning at the very outset of adoption, and I think that was a very fortunate thing. We used it to optimize buildings in real time, so it was fault detection analytics and operational programming, incredibly impactful. So it's one of the things that I continue to champion today. As they talked about this morning, one of the most difficult things is funding those types of programs. So as they were talking this morning about having the ability to program perhaps the next generation of AI, I was hoping that I could join in that little bit of a revolution and try and create a new tool to replace the model that we've been using for the last 15 years. So, as I mentioned, just want to talk about the role of codes in the communities. So, housing itself, particularly in the First Nations, is central to how they live and how they interact with their environment as a whole. So we know that social interactions in healthy, stable, clean environment are better than interactions, as we were talking at lunch. If you drive through some of the First Nations, it's hard to think that those conditions are fostering the best social environment for people. We know economically the cycle of bad housing is hugely problematic in that houses tend to break down from, as you mentioned, the lack of building codes. Houses are falling apart long before their normal useful life. What that creates is a cycle where you can't repair fast enough, you can't afford to repair, and if you're spending all your money repairing, how are you building new? You're not. And so when we talk about housing challenges, that this creates the shortage that we see. And for Indigenous people, they require 50,000 new houses. And statistically, they have 80,000 houses that need major repairs. It's a massive challenge. So one of the things that we often talk about is overcrowding on the First Nations. And as a species, humans generate about 50 liters of water per human per day. And if you put an abundance of people in a house, you have an abundance of water. And by code, a house is designed for no more than 2 occupants per bedroom. So if you cram 12 people into a house ventilated for 6 people, you have 50% too much moisture. That moisture naturally permeates the building. Our building materials, drywall, wood, they're all susceptible to water damage. So what we get is premature rot and decay of the structure.
Did you say 50 liters per day?
Yes, if you take into account showers, cooking, and breathing, the average is about 50 liters per day.
But like, it becomes airborne, or you're talking about?
It's vapor, yes.
But if you were to condense that, there's no way that 50 liters. Because, like, I'm just trying to understand what you're saying. 50 liters of water, like a tote
Yes.
of water,
Yes.
gets dispersed into the air per person per day.
Yes.
Wow.
If you're showering, on average, if you're showering and cooking
Yeah.
and cleaning and everything else.
Yeah. So it's kind of a staggering number for sure.
I didn't think it was that. I knew it was a lot, but I didn't think it was that much.
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and please feel free. We are a super small group. Ask questions if you want to ask questions. Interrupt. The interaction is much more fun than just standing here talking. So please. I think the concept that of how much humidity is generated, it's a little bit foreign because we never think about it. I didn't think about it till I was doing my research. You as a building scientist, you've seen it, but it's never been in my wheelhouse. So even when we're designing ventilation in a commercial building, we would never look at things like humidity rates. We naturally control humidity. We move towards heat recovery in our newer designs, but we never had to factor it in as you would residents. So kind of as I touched on, we know that the buildings that we're building are today and will continue to be of wood construction. They're, generally speaking, the steel construction can be used like on interior walls, not as common on exterior walls. There are some challenges with its thermal characteristics in comparison to wood. So I haven't seen anything recently that said there'll be a shift. But I think the sort of important concept is understanding that when you get in, particularly in the northern climates, you'll get houses that are drafty and cold in the winter. If we're building to the minimum national building code, they're going to be uncomfortable in those different climates. They'll be overly humid in the summer, and again, that's where, if you take that, combine it with the prevalence of overcrowding, the chances of having to mitigate mold are 100%. It's just functionally going to be a problem. So one of the most disheartening examples that I saw when I was doing my research was the Cat First Nation. Oh, sorry, I didn't have prompts in mind. In the Cat First Nation, the problem of overcrowding and rot and moisture was extreme, to the point where the council declared a state of emergency. What I think about this story that strikes me the hardest is that in that community, over 100 children required medical care to treat mold-related symptoms. So when people ask me, well, why am I so motivated to help in the Indigenous communities, it's that. There's thousands of children living in those conditions in Canada, and it's preventable, it's solvable. I just want to be part of solving it. So I wanted to touch a little bit on the Canadian building codes and their structure. So the first building code, as it says here, 3,500 years ago. So the understanding as a race that we needed to look at how we build has been around for a long time. In 1666, at the Great Fire of London, which was huge in that it was catastrophic. It burned for days. It did an enormous amount of damage. And that was the first time where fire regulations for city planning really started to happen. It's where insurance companies started to get involved. And the prevalence of insurance companies and their influence on code can't be strongly enough said. I would say the best path for seeing code modified is insurance companies putting pressure on the government. In the 1800s, there was fires in most of the major cities across North America. And again, out of that, North America became more aware of the context of fire risk in the cities and started to do a different style of planning. And that process kind of continues on today. The first version of the NBC was released in 1941. It technically wasn't the first Canadian building code, but it had never really been formalized and documented on the national platform. So today, the National Building Code is updated. They say every 5 years. Sometimes it takes a little longer. The last one, they released it. It took a couple of years to adopt it. It is an evolving process. I think the important thing to know about code, though, in Canada is that they do a really good job of learning. And so every evolution or iteration of the code has been better than the last. They're a bit more thoughtful, a bit more pragmatic, and I think that the concept of learning and taking those lessons learned has really brought value to the code process. You can actually volunteer to give feedback to the regulators if you desire. So just quickly touch on how code is made. So NRCan technically manages and publishes the codes of Canada. But they don't legislate the codes. The legislation of codes becomes provincial jurisdiction. So in Canada, there are BC, Alberta, Quebec, and Ontario have their own building codes. So they are, they call the Canadian code a model code. And what they mean is that Canada provides a framework. So that's great, you have a framework. The provinces then have the right to take that framework and regionalize it. So if you were in BC, they do more work on rain screens, allowing buildings to shed water because of excess moisture. If you were in a region that has seismic activity, they change the foundations of the building. So you can adopt based on your requirements. A little later on, I'll talk about the climate zones in Canada, and part of the climate zone topic feeds into this very thing, in that if you're extreme north, you're going to be building for a higher number of heating days. So in BC particularly, the BC government introduced the STEP code, and the energy STEP code for buildings was the first tiered code to come out in Canada. And it of itself influenced the Canadian government because it forced them to change our codes, the National Energy Code. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. In Vancouver went a step further than the Energy STEP Code in BC and has an even more stringent set of guidelines. And for groups like yours, that's where passive house becomes an option. And really there's only Toronto and Vancouver that have kind of adopted those really strict regulations. So for those who don't get excited about building code as much as I do, And I'm very sorry for that because building code is cool. The building code is actually, it's a suite of codes. So there are the building code, energy, fire, plumbing, and the farm buildings code. You'll notice I have a little picture in there for the farm building code. They haven't changed it that I've seen in probably 30 years. So it still looks like a 1988 Xerox page. So I didn't think it would be pretty in my little presentation. So the building code itself is functionally set up into 9 parts. At 1,560 pages, when you open it, it looks like a beast. It's daunting, but it's actually really well constructed. And if the government could spare all the jargon at the start of most sections, it's actually quite easy to understand. But the first 2 parts, if you were to ever be excited to look at the code, skip the first 2 parts. It's super complicated. Once you get into fire protection, structural design, environmental separation, which we talked about in your speech today about the noise transfer between the 2-suite or 4-suite and 8-suite buildings, is people were worried about noise transfer, but the government has again learned that they can adopt and make the codes more useful and more relevant, and things like preventing noise transfer in a new build is a huge gain over a 1960s building. So there's a section on heating, plumbing, safety measures, and then part 9, my favorite part, is housing in small buildings. If you look at that list there, the first 8 sections of that list are what we'll explain here in a minute. They're large buildings. It applies to large buildings. It's built for engineers and architects. If for the average user, it has no relevance. All of the work that I do in the building code today is in part 9, which is 1,000 pages into the code book. So the BC Energy Step Code, as I talked about earlier, was a chance for the BC government to really adopt their own code. They were able to refine the code, but what it is most importantly doing is it forced the government to adopt tiered codes. And that means that if you look in the old code, it was very prescriptive. You must build a building this way, and that was it. In the tiered code, it's the first time that choice of how you build started to enter the equation. And I'll explain a little bit about what that choice looks like, but when BC did this, it did it in advance of the 2020 National Energy Code, about 2 years in advance, and it actually forced the government to stop and take a look at a really prescribed method of building and allowing for some optionality. So in the code world, it was kind of a momentous event. For average person, maybe not so much. Oops, sorry, we lost a little bit of my slides. Oh, there it is. Part 3 buildings. So this is the delineator. When I talked about the codes in 9 parts, the first 8 parts of the code really apply to these large commercial buildings, commercial buildings, institutional buildings, and the Part 9 of the code is small buildings. So I generally call it housing because that's normally what we're talking about in builds in the First Nations, but it's really anything up to 3 stories. So always, my rule of thumb is if it requires an elevator in code, then it's probably in the first part of code. If you can access it by stairs and still meet code, then you probably fall into Part 9. Sorry, before I move on, one quick point about Part 9 of the code. If you were ever inclined to read about energy, as we're going to talk about, the energy portion of code for small buildings is actually in the Part 9 of the National Building Code. It is not in the energy code. So it causes some confusion sometimes because people will naturally gravitate to the book that says National Energy Code for buildings, but small buildings are actually not there. So just wanted to take a quick second to talk a little bit about the science of buildings. Check time to make sure I'm not over. So the National Energy Code for buildings is much newer than the National Building Code. It really is only functionally about 20 years old. And it's, again, if you look at it at first glance, it's again 500 pages long, looks very daunting. When you're inside the code, it's actually very simple. The entire code is focused on basically 5 core components and how to achieve those 5 core components in compliance with the code. So it is more about how do I calculate the building envelope, how do I model the building envelope, how do I build the building envelope, and still meet the requirements of the code itself. So really 5 core concepts are at the heart of it. I would truthfully say half of the code is building envelope related. It is, to me, the most significant part of the code and the most detailed part of the constructability of meeting code. Lighting is fairly simple and straightforward. There's a little bit of calculation to it. There's a little bit of daylight harvesting if you're trying to achieve things like lead points. HVAC is very straightforward. Surface water heating, I don't understand why they don't call it hot water heating. It would make a lot more sense to me. But nobody's asking, so I guess I'll shut up and keep moving. And then there's a little bit about electrical systems and motors. Just an interesting tidbit. The government, or NRCan specifically, has built a software called CanMost, and it is about how to purchase and investigate motors, electric motors, and buy more efficient models. It's not often talked about. Super handy little tool. So, as I mentioned, we had introduced tiered strategies into building code. So this is really the intersection of where the designers have the ability to really make some decisions about how they're going to apply the energy code. So the prescriptive path is much like the original code of Canada. It's very straightforward. If you build it this way, you will comply with the minimum energy code. If you make choices in the building, you can trade. So you could build a very advanced mechanical system and maybe not as advanced building envelope. And you can kind of marry those things together in a building model and still be compliant with code. The interesting thing about that in the first iteration of code is human nature has an aversion to following codes with finding shortcuts. And so there were people building basically big tin sheds and putting the most efficient HVAC in it because it was cheap, and the entire intent of the code was out the window. So terrible, but human nature at its realist. So they have now modified the code to try and close that little loophole, but it's kind of important to know. And then performance-based path, this is really where BIM, or building information modeling, comes into play. The compliance with code becomes a very complex calculation, and to meet that performance criteria, you really have to dig in with a professional energy modeler. How that process is conducted is there are some really stringent requirements to make sure that it's not me sitting at home with my calculator going, yeah, it's going to work, that'll be good. So, but it does, again, it allows people some flexibility in how they design. So, as I mentioned earlier, the energy code's really designed around climate zones, and this sort of pattern applies across Canada. What the interesting thing, or this is fundamentally based on, I guess, is the number of heating degree days. And the heating degree days, obviously, when you get into a place like Vancouver, and it's very low. And so you're looking for less than 3,000 heating degree days, where if you are up in Smith River there, you're probably in the range of about 12,000 heating degree days. So how you're designing your envelope and how you're designing your mechanical are radically different. So again, BC's step code does a very nice job of following the climate zones. So if you actually look through the BC code, for each climate zone, it has a set of parameters of how you could meet each performance tier. So it's very well laid out, it's very methodical, and you can easily navigate how you would construct or how you would design in each of those zones. So again, I think fundamental to the National Energy Code for buildings is the house itself is a system, and it has to be treated not as a single intervention. It has to be treated as a holistic entity. And so when we talked earlier about humidity and the fact that people give off humidity, when a house is fundamentally designed to base building code, it's designed to 2 occupants per bedroom. Again, so you're looking at 6 occupants. what we find particularly in the First Nations is that because they're overcrowded, they're so far beyond the requirements of the home that the home decays incredibly, incredibly quickly. When we're talking about some of the newer technologies, by introducing different ventilation, by introducing more advanced equipment, they're able to manage the errors inside the homes and then create that better environment for people. So I think this has really hit home for me. We're working with one of the nations sort of in northern Alberta right now, and the design team that is doing their 11 new buildings, what are you doing for ventilation? Code? Oh, so nothing. What are we doing with the envelope? Code. Okay. What are you doing for insulation? Code. So frustrating. I'm glad it was a Teams call. I could turn off my screen. I can swear at the table. Very, very frustrating. And so when I talk about things that I want to try and help with, I want to help with this. And you know, when I talk to you, I want to learn from you so that I can help with this. So these slides are courtesy of BC, the BC Codes folks. They've also allowed me to use them in the toolkit that I'm building for Eco Canada. I'm very grateful to them. Hiring a designer to build 3D images is a very expensive proposition. What's changed a lot in the code is really the finishing details regarding roof ventilation and airflow, proper insulation. One, I would say the most prevalent thing that I see going to the nations is premature roof failure. And one of the sort of toolkit pieces that we tried to build was to really show how many nails really go on a shingle, what the starter strip should do, what the membrane should look like. And so they have a better understanding of what that assembly does. One big change in the new National Energy Code is actually how vapor barriers are done. They want them sandwiched in between the framing, so wrapped and sandwiched so that they're continuous. And I would say the continuity of insulation, pardon me, is a massive part of each of the tiers of the code, just trying to make sure that buildings are airtight and watertight. Ventilation design, again, just highlighting how important ventilation is in the buildings. One of the things that I saw at Siksika recently was the last set of buildings they did had an energy code compliance requirement, which is great. And they achieved it by using heat recovery ventilators. So just conceptually, for those who may not have worked with one, all it really is designed to do is capture the energy of the incoming fresh air. So in the summer, you're transferring the cold from your exhaust air to the incoming air so that you're not reconditioning the air. And then in the summer, in the winter, when you're bringing in fresh air, you're transferring the heat from your outgoing air to pre-warm the incoming air. What that allows you to do, with the addition of some filtration, is complete exponentially more air exchanges than you would with your normal furnace system. So the air in your home, you're able to maintain the temperature characteristics without adding a bunch of energy, and you're able to bring fresh air in so you can control moisture and particulate. So it's a incredible tool for making better buildings. This is, to me, the Achilles heel of the First Nations construction, and it's how windows were installed. I don't know if any of you rented when you were younger, but had drafty windows and you could feel airflows, your curtains wouldn't blow in the wind, all because windows were never installed properly. The code has gone quite far now, particularly in BC and Toronto, where they're wrapping a full membrane around the window frame before the window's installed. The frames are gasketed at the back, and then low expansion foam is installed on the interior to prevent any air transfer. And I say low foam expansion for any of you who might want to be handy at home. If you use high foam expansion, you bend the PVC window frames, and your windows don't open. So your new window, not so good anymore. May have made that mistake myself. Might have, maybe, could have. Tried to explain that to my wife. You done it?
Well, I was just going to say, yesterday I spent the day with a guy here in town who has a patent for a window installation product, which actually is amazing for draining and keeping water out, and for bringing the dew point away from the exterior wall.
Oh, I would love to be connected to him.
Yeah, no, I can get you in contact.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. You know, as I said in the session this morning, you know, technology is moving so fast, but the more of these types of things that I get to do, you get introduced to new, smart people that are innovating all the time, and it's magic if you can make those connections. So
he invented it 12 years ago. It's been 12 years in the making.
Oh goodness!
He's finally ready to launch it big time.
Is that like a patent thing?
He's got a patent, yeah.
Yeah, that's the patent process is a bit arduous. I know a fella, anecdotally, sorry, he designed a building control system that used like a radio frequency to predict outdoor air temperature. And by the time he got his patent done, we can do it with a simple trigger inside an automation program, so it's all electronic. And the poor guy, he's spent $30,000 on patent lawyers across North America. So there is something about the technology adoption rate. NECB is really about air tightness testing. Again, back to the concept that the building envelope is the biggest part of the code today. It is the most important part of the code today. One thing I don't know if everyone knows, NRCan has a program both for commercial buildings and for residential buildings where they will come out and do your testing. I think in both categories you can generally get it for nothing, and it's fascinating information. So the Green Home Energy Grant, they'll come out and do your house. I think normally it's like a $500 test or something, but they'll come out and let you know how you did. Being that I'm an energy geek, my house did pretty good.
I think the funding for the lower door test is gone.
Is it gone?
Yeah, it went with the grant, the loan is still.
Ah, okay. Because I got it as part of the loan. There you go. Thank you.
So you said your house is good, that means it doesn't leak very much, or what's good?
Yeah, it's fairly airtight. I'd say it's in the top 10% of standard construction, but given my house is a 1968 bungalow, that we've done windows and ceiling, we've done spray foam insulation in the walls and in the attic. We blew in insulation in the attic, so my attic is right now R62 or something like that. So it's fairly good. It cut my heat bills in half the year we insulated the house, which, given today's economy, that seems like a decent little payback. So, given that the session is 3 hours long, I tried to put kind of 2 10-minute breaks in, just to allow everyone to stand up, go to the washroom, do whatever they want. I'm happy to chat, of course, because it's all geekery for me, but also happy for you guys just to take a moment and take a breath. All right. I want to talk about the process of adopting code. And again, this is really, again, I just want to qualify, this is my lens looking at indigenous community in general. So there's a little color to adopting code rather than just traditionally complying with like the City of Calgary code. So again, I think the theme that we try and present is just how critically important it is that we find ways to make sustainable communities. And you know, I talked earlier about premature degradation of properties, and I think that in particular creates such a terrible economic, social, environmental problem that I think it's just imperative that we find ways to help communities adopt codes. And I'm a huge fan of the trying to help empower self-governance and the ability to try and build a framework with them so that they can sustain themselves. One of the inherent issues with code and governance on the nations is trust. And it, like, I should be no surprise to anyone that if chubby little white guy comes in and says, "Hey, you're building terrible buildings," not always super well received. So a lot of the work that we do is predicated on building trust. If we can build trust, we can help. But it's critical that we find ways, and I mean it's a huge part of Eco Canada's mandate, is they're trying to prepare capacity building. And when I talk to, I would say every nation I've ever worked with, they talk about capacity. The capacity to understand, the capacity to staff, really sometimes the capacity to open the correct doors. When I talked, I had a question after my last session, and from a lady at Siksika, and she said, "You said that there's funding for fire code on the nation, and you could do anything from buying smoke detectors to building fire stations. And there's $15.6 billion a year allotted." And
What's that called? The fund?
Send me an email. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Come see me after the show. I can look it up on my computer. But it's those, like, trying to find all of the tools. And that's one thing when I was working on the toolbox, was trying to find, well, where can I find funding? And it's incredibly amount of opportunities that are out there. It's just, I don't think people always know how to access them, or sometimes they just need some help accessing them. But go ahead.
Is that specifically for First Nations that are not self-governing, or is that for all across Canada?
It's
SGIGs?
as far as I can tell, it is. The only caveat to the funding is that it is Indigenous in nature, so it has to just be for a community. I don't think that self-governed or so self-governance is sorry, this is a little detour. Self-governance in itself is complicated because you can self-govern to a degree under the Indian Act. They have the inherent natural right to govern themselves. The difference between self-governance and governing under the original Indian Act is that the government can override you. So you need permissions from the government to do things. The government can if you have a bylaw that your council has adopted and said, this is how we want to build a house. The government can come in and say, that's a stupid bylaw, and go, no. When you're self-governing, you have the autonomy to make decisions. So there is a discrepancy in like how you talk about self-governance, and that you can be the authority with jurisdiction in both sequences. It's just your power to enact and enable things is different.
Are you familiar with SGIGs?
No, sorry, not that.
Self-governing Indigenous governments, they're looking at new ways of funding them.
Oh, yes,
And it
sorry.
seems like they might not be allowing for access to this type of additional funding once they make that type of agreement.
So if you self-govern, the minister has responsibilities to fund the transition of power and create the capacity. Right now, the legislation is you have the ability to sort of negotiate terms for what that continual funding model looks like. I haven't seen anything that says that is changing, but that doesn't, as we were talking earlier about energy curves, like if I was going to run down that hill, I would go to Indigenous Services Canada and make sure that I connected with the right person, so that I wasn't offering incorrect legal guidance. You just have to be, I'm going to say I understand enough to be pretty dangerous now, but that doesn't mean that this is the Bible of this is how that law works. As far as I've seen, there's still capacity funding out there, and on the flip side, what I've seen is I don't think everybody understands how much is available to them from the government today. Sorry, Pooja.
Yeah, I just wanted to give the name because I have the email.
Oh.
So it's First Nations Fire Protection Strategy 2023-2028.
Yes.
Who would you rather fight the country of First Nations and your national?
There, what she said.
What is it, sorry, First Nations, what?
First Nations Fire Protection Strategy 2023-2028.
Good teamwork. So, in our little interactive group here today, this is the first part of what I'd really like to talk about. I'm interested in learning from everyone outside of the box of, if you're working at something like this on a continual basis, you get a little bit of myopathy. Sorry, it's just tunnel vision, and it interesting to just hear from outside what barriers there are to adopting code. So I talked a little bit earlier about trust as one of the big barriers, and I think that's fair and earned. One of the other things that really comes into play is trying to integrate culture into the mix and be culturally sensitive when you're working with the nations. And one of the examples I use of this, of where code is actually learned and is actually quite smart, is in the fire code. There are provisions to turn off your fire alarm system for a smudge ceremony. I learned this 100 years ago in building operations. I had the government of Canada was a client, and they're like, "We're going to do smudge ceremony," and I'm like, "What? What? You're going to start a fire inside this brand new building? Like, what if the sprinklers go off? What if the smoke alarm goes off and we interrupt something that's culturally significant by evacuating the building?" Did not seem like a really great idea. But there are, and we did figure it out, there are processes that you can follow, and I've written for some building companies, I've written processes for them, gone to site, figured out how to disarm the systems temporarily, what measures you take with the fire department of the municipality, and lo and behold, you can conduct a smudge ceremony. So when I say the codes are learning, they really are, and it's surprising. Smudge ceremonies or smoke ceremonies, excuse me, come up quite a lot, and I didn't know it was in code. At the time when we were trying to solve it, I didn't know, and had I known, I would have had a much easier path to trying to navigate what happened. And again, I talk about resource constraints because in sustainability in general, I've been selling sustainability, the concept of sustainability as an employee for 15 years. And no matter how good the idea is, if the math doesn't work, projects don't happen. So here are just 4 examples of funding programs that folks might access, or folks in your circles that may be looking for funding. There are some great tailored programs out there. CMHC, quite fascinating. We hear about CMHC every day about our houses, and we know that they insure our mortgages, and that's all wonderful. They have a huge amount of programs for doing work in First Nations. But there are also some complications. In the government contracts per se, their buildings are supposed to be built to code. That, like, it's written in their loan agreements that you're going to build to code, although most communities don't build to code. The weirdest part of the CMHC model is that they will inspect progress. They will send an inspector to site. They'll come to say, your wall's up, progress, and they leave. They don't check the build quality. They don't see if it meets the specifications. They don't look at the construction detail. They just tick the box. And so in my little world building, it's things like that that if we could find ways to interconnect the programs to really satisfy not compliance, satisfy the need of building better. It doesn't, CMHC in my mind doesn't have to govern how people construct, but they could do a better job of saying what you're building isn't good enough. And if they could stop it mid-construction, that's a whole lot better than trying to fix it when it's falling down at the end. So this goes back to our earlier discussion about the authority having jurisdiction. And I kind of bolded this out. I'm sorry for shouting at everyone here, but this is one of the things that in almost every conversation I've had with folks that are working at the nations, if I talk to them about their buildings, they say, well, we have the right of self-governance, and they don't necessarily understand the distinction of how that self-governance looks. And when we talk about capacity building and trying to train, this is one of the things that I'd love to try and teach a little bit, because I think it would add some value. So this gives you a snapshot of what happens when you're under the Indian Act. And I think this kind of goes to the point that you were making. So there are huge funding constraints when a nation is running under the Indian Act, because essentially they have to figure out a model where they can self-fund. And I don't think it's any surprise there isn't necessarily a lot of extra money floating around in some of the First Nations. You drive through and that is pretty apparent. So part of why I think the education is so important is just that. If we could help them get funding so they had capacity, they had staff, they had training, we could empower them to build their own regulatory cycle. And somebody said it to me this morning, I think it might have been you when we were in the green room over there. It's the concept of teach a man to fish. Let them be empowered. So under the framework agreement, so the framework agreement is the second legislative change to the Indian Act. And the framework agreement of the three formats that I've looked at, the framework agreement is the first clear delineation. Here's the process to self-governance. It's very straightforward. There's like 13 steps. It takes about 2 years. In approaching that, the government will fund it. They actually have an actual body of government that is Indigenous people helping Indigenous people adopt code. So a couple of the big federal government bodies that work heavily in the Indigenous communities. One of the biggest, of course, is Indigenous Services Canada. And I think that, like Indigenous Services Canada, if you're looking for funding programs, there are some available through ISC. It has a mandate similar to Eco-Canada's in capacity building, although they don't do some of the other great work that Eco-Canada does. But they certainly are there to support empowerment. But again, I think the inspection process or the lack of governance on inspection process hinders even ISC from garnering national traction. Again, CMHC, I told you, go ahead.
Don't we need to follow code or have some kind of a compliance certification to get insurance?
There is a reason why people should adopt code. So off reserve, yes. On reserve, a lot of what would normally be insured is self-funded. Yeah. I think insurance, and again, in the toolkit, that's one of the things we talk about. Why would you do this? Well, you could insure. And if you think about the cost of self-insuring, particularly if you've had a series of losses, there's a plausible financial case for insurance. So yes, I think there are a lot of good reasons, and again, it's trying to help people land at following those reasons. One of the other things about CMHC is, and I talked earlier about my experience here, understanding that that the people designing the houses that were being built were following minimum code. It would be, again, wonderful if they could just pick one of the tiers and say, we're going to build 50% better than code, or, it would be, I'd be euphoric if they would start building passive houses everywhere. It would, I think, really go a long way to helping solve the problems. And I do think in the construction realm, just in general, if there are some beautiful examples of communities like the Tobique First Nation where they used the CMHC program to train people to build. And so they took young teenagers from that nation and taught them to build. And so there's a chance to create an economy around that construction. So it's not a contractor coming from Calgary to build, but it is your own people involved in building. And I think there's an elementary school that was built by, I can't remember the name of the architect. They built it 25 years ago, and it was built with a huge component of community labor. And so the kids understood that their uncles and aunts were mothers and fathers were building this school. 25 years later, it is one of the best attended schools in any nation, and it is pristine. There's no graffiti, no damage. It's treated as essential to the community. And again, I think that's the nirvana, how to help a community help itself. So again, I've talked a lot about capacity gaps. We know there's still lots of room for infrastructure development, and certainly I think as a whole the industry can do better in being thoughtful and mindful about what's happening in those communities. And you can't neglect the bottom line that it is the nation itself that is going to decide. So part of finding a path forward is finding a path forward with Chief and Council. And again, back to 58 slides ago, it's about trying to build some trust. So we have a small room, and I did not bring a note taker, but they are recording me. So if anybody wanted to listen to that, I would laugh hysterically, but I might listen back. What I would really like your help in, and because we're such a small group, maybe we can bundle up a little, or we can just have one big chat sessions. So I use this community, or in community, to understand what the biggest challenges a community faces. So given our audience today, I'd kind of like to turn this on its head. You've listened to me prattle on about challenges on community, about moisture, about code. I'd love to just have some questions about what are the implications of code, how we might apply it, what you think might be barriers, and what you, in your experience, might think are good solutions. And although this is Indigenous in nature, you could say it would apply in a cultural scenario where you're trying to merge two cultures together. If you're trying to merge political views, those things happen all the time. So if you would be so kind to help me ideate on the challenges of constructing quality housing. Crickets. Go ahead, Kevin.
I guess I'll start. So I'm more on the kind of commercial world, not the Indigenous world, but a lot of it is the race to the bottom. It's everyone's still driven just by costs, so trying to... So what I'm seeing most is the...
No, did that? Can I have the field mic? There we go. Thank you.
So in the kind of larger community, not necessarily Indigenous, what I'm seeing is one of the bigger problems with adopting higher building codes is just the race to the bottom, and there is, until the codes force you to build better, there is no real imperative to do that the general public still is not educated enough on the benefits of it. So especially now when we have under capacity and over demand, you can build a poor quality house and sell it for above what you thought you would build it. So some of the reasons to build better quality don't seem to be there as much as there was. So it's a lot of it about education, and unfortunately I think the codes are just going to have to move up before mass adoption of higher codes occur. And we've seen that happen in BC. And BC said the codes are moving up at this stage, so the industry can't really fight it because they know it's coming, and then they'll adapt. But the construction industry is very resistant to change, especially residential, because the barrier to enter as a residential builder is lowest. So it's like the bottom tier of construction, which means kind of the profit margin is often lower. So anytime you change, you have to think, and anytime you think costs money, and they don't want to risk their profit.
So when you and I were talking earlier, the statistics say the incremental cost, maybe not building a passive house, but building an energy efficient house, is 4%?
Yep, Yeah, so I think that's where education comes in, and being able to show to people that that incremental cost is fairly low, and it's even lower when once you start to combine both the capital upfront cost with the ongoing maintenance cost. And assuming you have a mortgage in there, then it's the monthly cost of operations, which is your mortgage plus your operating costs.
Yeah.
Then it starts to make more sense, and as you go higher density, it starts to make more sense. But until people are taught and understand that, they're still stuck at, it's going to cost me more, and that's their opinion, even though it's not necessarily based on fact.
So, does anybody in the group have an idea? Oh, there you go. About, thank you. How would, in general, we create education that would help solve that problem?
Just relax.
I was going to run around, and then I'm like, I don't know how good that's going to work.
I literally wrote a book called How to Future-Proof Your Home to solve that problem, and I was trying to create a business to solve that problem. And I totally agree with what you just said there. Someone who read my book went and took it and fished, was trying to find builders to build a near passive house in Saskatchewan, and he wanted to build a double wall, R60 wall, good building, and he had 4 builders tell him, why would you want to do that? It'll never pay for itself. I said, how much extra did it cost? He said, it was less than the hardwood flooring. I said, well, how much does the hardwood flooring pay you back every month? Nothing. Exactly. He said he argued with the builders, and they would not even listen to him. This was 10 years ago. Maybe this was actually probably 2013 or 14. But what you're saying is true. People just don't get it, and it blows my mind that they don't get it because it's so obvious.
And the conversation is easier with younger builders than older people who both can't teach an old dog new tricks. Does kind of apply.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm an old dog. Just hold on there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I wanted to say also, I work a lot, I'm the owner's engineer for First Nation in the Yukon, and I know it's not a problem in most of Canada, but my client was designated a piece of land to build their community on in the town, and that land happened to be all permafrost. And so now the whole community is sinking. All of the buried infrastructure is failing. And they also have land up on, we call it the bench. It's about 30 meters above the river valley, and it's good land. There's no chance of permafrost up there. But now they have the misfortune of having to either move all of these houses up there or rebuild them, or spend around $15 million just to keep their water and sewer infrastructure functioning. So permafrost is a big deal in certain areas of Canada, especially once you get north of 60. Yes, it stops being permanent, and then you've got major problems. So
Sorry.
yeah, those are thermocouplers are junk.
Sorry.
They're junk.
I'm an old guy. I didn't hear your question.
Oh, I said, have they looked into thermocouplers? They use them in pipelines.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You need to have very, very cold winters, and you need to have very cool summers for them to work, and that's just not going to happen anymore. It's gone.
Oh, it's already gone.
Well, it's disappearing, and all the buildings are sinking. So.
I just had a question. Okay, so on the reserve, I understood that if the people living there leave their home, they lose their home because the land is owned by the reserve and the home too. And who pays for the house to be constructed? Those are my 2 questions. Who owns the land? Is that the situation?
Yeah, a really great question. So part of the process of adopting the legal framework of land code is that you essentially would build a community plan, which most nations don't have. And that community plan, that's where you would start to do environmental assessments, that's where you would do land planning, that's normally where you would be laying out the sewer and water infrastructure, hopefully not in permafrost apparently, so all of those pieces sort of fall in there. On reserve, what I see most often is that you have a right of occupation kind of permit issued to say that this piece of land is your piece of land. Who pays for housing can vary. Most often it would be funded by the nation itself. Individual owners can apply for a CMHC mortgage. I believe that, like our standard mortgage, I think it's 5% down, and they can build a house. But the interesting thing about if they're funding within CMHC, for example, if they were to leave the house, or if the house became no longer habitable, there is insurance that will cover that for a fixed period of time, government insurance, Government of Canada, but the ultimate cost ends up back on the nation itself. And that's when I talk about houses where the cycle of decay is faster than the cycle that they can replace and add housing, that all their money is going to the self-insuring of houses falling apart. So there are two ways to fund. So I imagine that's probably spread. I don't spend a lot of time in the who's paying for this kind of stuff. Most of the work I would do is for Chief and Council. It's a good question. Oh.
Sorry, I always have. So I have an experience that might help a little bit in what are the biggest challenges your community faces as in our communities, and these particular circumstances were here in Calgary. I will not say the builder's name. It is a very reputable company. It's somebody who intends to do well, and in our specific area, they had a couple fairly big blunders, and I'm not sure who the responsible one, but I think it comes down to something you had said before about inspections and verification. So the last house we built was built to higher standards than code and requirements, but yet through the entire build process, they never put any insulation into the roof. And then later, which caused structural problems, raft lifting and other things. And this is so it's not something you would expect to happen, especially when they're trying to do a higher standard build. And they built another house very close to our house, and it took 10 years for that owner to realize they never insulated that roof. And so the home builder, the city, everybody approved this house. Then the original owners left. The new owners had an inspector come in, and it wasn't until years after the second owner that they realized there was no insulation in the roof. So I think that's just one example, but it's not a one-off example. I think if it could be somehow built into code, a certain level of training for inspectors, accountability for those inspectors. When these sorts of things happen, how you can do what was the root cause for that,
And I think the global look back is always incredibly powerful, and the lessons learned are always great. As a project manager, your ability to do a good inspection it is incredibly important. And I've built over $1 billion in projects, and I can tell you that no project ever goes the way you think it is. It just never does. Nature, human nature, acts of God, and weird stuff happens. It really does. So, we have a really diverse group. So if you were to think about how Canada in general interacts with Indigenous communities, and historically there's been some huge some things that I would say, as a born and bred Calgarian, I find completely un-Canadian. But how would we as a group, how do we collectively try and bridge that? That's a grand divide.
Say reconciliation. No, just one sentence.
Oh.
So we need to listen. Truth and reconciliation goes the way that we can listen to them and try to understand what went wrong and how it didn't happen not so long ago. Like in the 70s, that's when some of the big stuff started getting realized and getting exposed. And even in the last couple of years, some stuff has been exposed and found. So when we listen to their community and then work with them, then hopefully that'll help. That's all we can do with reconciliation, is try to be there. Reconciliation.
So you had said that when they build their own community buildings, after they've put their heart and soul into building this building, there's a lot more respect for it. Mm-hmm. I find that it's usually those bad experiences that go really, really sideways and nasty, and you actually live and learn from the harm that it did. Perhaps we could reach out to the First Nation people who have lived it, who have grown up into these houses, train them up to be inspectors and have them come inspect our houses, because they're going to have that pride and that knowledge and that history of knowing how things can go wrong when you don't have the code. So they could become a really passionate group to be those inspectors who obviously are failing in many ways.
Yeah. So,
or not that they would fail in many ways. They would have that integrity, and yes. So they would have that passion and that desire to make sure that that doesn't happen to other people.
that's fair. So how do we accomplish that in communities that are often impoverished? I know, deep questions. Any thoughts?
There has to be some kind of drive from within.
I'll give you back your job.
I don't want to sound bad, but it has to come from within. People have to, be responsible, and there needs to be, that pride in your community, and that responsibility is the best way. Because, in my experience, I've seen if you don't have the capacity, it doesn't matter how good you're going to build something, it's going to fall apart at some point. So you need to build the capacity, but it has to come from within. And I don't know how to get that ball rolling, but I think that's really important.
Thank you. Kind of a change gears a little. I'll give you an anecdote. So part of being in sustainability is there are funding programs. BC often leading the way, like most things environmental. In in my day-to-day, we work with a lot of multi-residential landlords. BC Hydro has a program where they will fund $5,000 for an energy audit, $30,000 for design and feasibility study, and then further funding as much as $500,000 to build projects. We talked to 250 landlords. Do you know how many energy audits at $0 people took? No one. And I still am absolutely gobsmacked. How in the world does that happen? So what I'd like to ask all of you is, how do we make sustainability more material in today's society? How do we make people change their mind, change their thinking? I'm fascinated. I'd love to just hear your thoughts on that.
I think some people, it's until your children start getting sick.
Sorry. We'll do you, and then we'll ask Pooja.
I would say a big motivator. There we go. I think for a lot of people, especially parents, it's when they're children. Sometimes you overlook your own health, but when your children are starting to get sick, that tends to be a big motivator.
That's a hard motivator.
Right? Like, if on the First Nations, there's all this mold and you're saying 100 and something people are in the hospital, is that motivating people? Like, it's not that you want to make people get sick, but if there's a way to show them at least the potential, right? If it isn't the way it is, if this efficiency doesn't just save you dollars, but it saves your health.
That's fair. Fear is a prime motivator. Go ahead.
Reminded me of what someone said earlier in one of the sessions, one of the speakers, cost incentives. Like, money is also a good motivator. That's for agriculture, and I know that there's some in like energy tier. Maybe that, if there's cost incentives.
That's good. I'm gonna run all the way to the back. I'm gonna get my steps in.
Thank you. I think it's more important to kind of show them why it's needed. The awareness, education, and the why. Answering why is the most effective way to get people to do things. Because I know for one of my projects, we were offering some of the energy audits as well, and we only had 1 or 2 people say yes to that. And that too because we were able to kind of relate to that. It's like why that's important for your operations, like why you need it. So I think that's the main thing to get people to do things.
Is there a type of message that resonates better than others when we're trying to educate?
Just gonna add on to the last question. I would say enforcement is really important, because one thing I've realized about sustainability is it's kind of future oriented. Because like most of the stuff we're talking that's gonna happen, it's more like into the future. Like you don't get mold from building your house today. It happens 10 years down the line, 5 years down the line. You know, like most people, we're humans. You know, like we don't want to worry about the future. Like everybody wants to worry about what's happening in the nearest future, like next 1 year. Like so, like enforcement is really really important. Like because most people don't really care. We set up financial incentives is really important. But you just gave an example where in BC, they offer them $5,000 30,000 and didn't still take it. So like people don't want to worry about stuff like that. So what the government can do is just have like a art and a good legislative and enforcement tool that you can just use and just enforce people to get this stuff done. I feel like this is the best to go around this and making sure like get done.
That's good. I think one of the things that the government has done, and when you talk about setting a path, and we can talk about, like, Canada has really well-defined climate goals. The Pan-Canadian framework is extremely clear on where we hope to go by 2050. We're failing. They're incentivizing, and the programs are failing. So maybe another question for the group is, what type of incentive, if you're going to try and incentivize a behavior, what type of behavior could we incentivize? Do we have ideas on what would work?
Just after you said that a lot of these people did not, well, you said zero.
Zero.
Right? I try to put myself in their shoes and why. Like, it doesn't make sense to us why they would say no. And if there's an issue with trust, like you were talking about, they could be thinking something like, oh, you're going to give me something for free, but then you're going to tell me all these things I need to pay for to make it better. And
yeah, I think this is, so in this specific example, this is commercial landlords. These are people that own portfolios of 25, 50, 75 buildings. They're billionaires. It's not about, I mean, there could be the factor of, I'm going to try and sell them something after, sure. But it's not, they shouldn't be out of tune with environmental policy. The most common answer that we get back is that they think they might hold the building 3 to 5 years. And so the economy does not yet really differentiate between a really sustainable building and a not sustainable building. So, you know, there are some complexities there. But yeah, any more thoughts on how sustainability might be incentivized by the government?
so there's the whole green, built green gold high density certification and different kind of certifications that are used for marketing. And so there's builders who are advertising those things. And so I think there is a monetary value in doing that. I just don't know how that can actually be effective, knowing that you were saying there are things out there that are it really means nothing. It gives the false impression of. So maybe a regulation on those types of things that are being used for marketing, being a green belt type thing, that aren't doing anything, that really means nothing, to build that trust that when the builders are saying that it does something, that it actually is doing something good. Because if for somebody to find out, oh, I bought this house and it has, or this condominium complex I built within or bought within it, to find out the certification the builder was marketing really meant nothing. You lose trust. You lose trust in the system.
Yeah, certifications are a complicated thing. You know, you talked about permafrost up north. I built a building, a LEED Gold, for the government of Canada in Yellowknife. So it sits on bedrock. It's lovely. Engineered 10 ways to Sunday, trying to make sure that we were going to keep it warm. And you know what I did in that lovely LEED Gold building? I installed electric heating around the entire main floor baseboard because people were wearing ski pants. So it sometimes in the world of, as I say, construction never goes exactly like you think it's gonna. We could not keep that building warm. So the grade beams sitting on the bedrock just weeped cold through the slab. And it was insulated to the highest spec we had at the time. Everybody felt confident, and I could not keep people comfortable. So I spent 2 weeks in Yellowknife in -50, orchestrating a job to move furniture and put electric heat in. So sometimes, you know, you just have to remember that intentions are.
Stand on the floor first to find out where the problem might have been.
Yeah, it carried straight up the grade beams. Like when we did thermography, you couldn't. It was just like, whew, oh, cold, and it is incredibly well insulated. So it just design flaw that was not accounted for. I'd say that was probably one of the biggest misses I ever had in a construction project. It was horrible. So building's beautiful. Occupants are happy now, but in that period, it was awful. All right, we'll take another 10-minute break. We'll come back. I have a little bit more slides to share, and then we'll wrap up with a little bit of Q&A if you have any more questions. So we'll our last little bit of the day, just want to talk about the process of enforcing building code. And again, same lens, obviously. It's about how we do this on First Nations. So at the start of the process for a nation that wants to self-govern, the legal terminology is that they'll opt in to the framework, and that starts a very structured program. It takes about 2 years. As we kind of touched on earlier, there is the government has a responsibility to provide certain information. They have a responsibility to help with the costs of setting up a framework, and then they have an obligation to have some funding for the costs of operating the framework. And I don't know the duration of that funding, so it may be like a 3 or 5 year kind of funding. I truthfully don't know. So we touched on it. There was a question earlier about how that infrastructure comes together in terms of planning for the community. And this is where community planning, environmental assessments, all of the things that we would expect a municipality to do, they sort of all. There's about 13 steps in the self-governance pathway. So for those, if you have folks in your network that would be looking for resources, excuse me, these are 4 resources that folks can access to try and help them through the process. Pardon me. A lot of this, again, is these programs are funded, so oftentimes there is funding within these programs to adopt certain portions of that. There are also some successful associations. There actually is quite a number of examples nationally of communities coming together, or nations coming together to support each other. So they will sort of amalgamate their resources. And I think when we talk about barriers to adoption, that is one of the really beautiful things that they can do, is they can share resources. So if one nation had a great building inspector perhaps their neighboring nation doesn't, and they can share that resource. And that, again, in terms of capacity building, that's sort of the magic that makes that work. There are also a number of dedicated organizations that are Indigenous-led, and sort of the common theme in those is the pride of for us, by us, and which I think that's powerful when he mentioned, you know, that you need the impetus, that internal drive. It is sometimes seeing those examples or learning about those examples and celebrating those examples is a way to get attention. So in terms of when I was building our little toolkit, that's one of the things we tried to do, is take examples like the Cheakamus Forest in BC. They've adopted, there's 2 nations neighboring Whistler, massive forest, beautiful forest, and they adopted the traditional sustainable governance of those forests. And in that process of adopting the cultural significance and the cultural ways, they've also created a business, and it's generated about $2 million of revenue. I think that's annual revenue. So it's a great way to start to show the flip side of what is possible. So I talked about a little bit earlier about enforcing code, the authority having jurisdiction. Again, if you talk about legal complexities, this is a legal complexity. But by legislation, regardless of whether it is under the original Indian Act or under the framework agreement, communities do have the right to govern themselves. It's just the interaction with the federal government that can change. So once a community is working towards its own sovereignty, one of the most important things that they can do is enact bylaws. Pardon me. In communities operating under the Land Act, they still have the right to create bylaws. It comes through chief and council, and they can regulate. The difference is if they are under their own governance, those bylaws are they are the be-all and end-all. Yeah, they become law in the communities. When developing bylaws, that is the first place where you have an opportunity to determine what you want to build, what you want your communities to look like, how you manage your land. So you work through all of those complexities. During the bylaw, there is a legal framework for how they're voted in, how they're approved, and the government, amongst the tools that it provides, has created a set of compliance documents. And so there's a very straightforward, delineated process, in part coming from the last framework agreement, which again supersedes the original Indian Act. So building permits, and this was a part of the conversation I had with the Siksika group a couple of weeks ago, is that this is a step that they haven't yet achieved, a building permit process. And I think that aside from the building permit process giving you a framework to live to measure to, just to make and enable code to happen. The other thing that happens in building permits is it is a potential revenue source to help support the capacity building. So ideally, in a municipality like Calgary, the building permit process pays for all of the inspectors. And so even if it wasn't carrying the full scope of inspecting, it is a possible path to helping folks work towards compliance. Building permits really across the country are very similar in every municipality. There's some that have gone a little bit high tech, but honestly, you can go like to the government of Surrey, and it is still a PDF that you download and fill out. So just traditionally, and I apologize for those that are either know this or don't want to know this, there really are 4 inspections. And I think this, when you gave your example of how do you miss insulation in an attic, because you don't inspect the attic. You never go up there. So there's some really funny construction nuances. So if you were going to an electrical inspection, they look at the how you lay out and install your wiring, but you don't. They don't really dig into all of the small details. The thing that we used to get caught on is if we crossed like a telecommunications wire with an electrical wire. There's a fire hazard between the two of them, and so that would get flagged. In today's smart homes, generally speaking, there's Cat5 run to a smart box, and there's no telephone cables anymore. So just the natural evolution of buildings has changed. So really that's what you see. They'll check how the building is framed. They'll check electrical and plumbing, just make sure that they were installed according to code, and they'll do that final inspection. And often that final inspection is pretty cursory, usually held at Tim Hortons in my experience. I didn't say that out loud, but it's kind of true. So this is technically the end of my content in the slides. And I know we have had some interaction, but we do have an awfully small group here. So I'm open to just answering questions. I'm open to discussing priorities. And I, again, this is more centric to a community audience. So also understand if that doesn't meet everyone's excitement needs. So happy to also just talk about code or or energy consumption or sustainability for a few minutes.
From your experience, what is the one most critical thing for people to look at? Is it building envelope and that air testing, blower, fan testing?
I would say I would encourage anyone that was building or involved in a building to look at everything in as much detail as possible. When I build, that I spend my time on site trying to make sure that everything is as it should be. I do some work on building commissioning, and It's something that we're trying to apply AI to make the process a little bit easier. But in traditional building commissioning, people would come in, sit at the computer and go, turn it on, turn it off. Yeah, that works. When we commission, what we try and do is turn it on. Does it do what it said it was going to do? Turn it off and see if it shuts off. As I said, I've been around a million years. The number of times I have found things wired backwards in buildings that have been around for 25 years is shocking. And there's a little tiny municipality just outside of Edmonton, and I was in their city hall. They're all having trouble with their heat. So I turned the thermostat down, and the heat turned on. So they have the wrong thermostats, have had since 1999. And I'm like, well, we can fix your building for $1,000, give or take. So the devil is in the details, always in buildings.
How much of that costs? Say it's randomly say 150 unit, 6-story condo.
It really depends on the scope. So what we were doing for that municipality was we're trying to help them get some funding. So much like I talked about funding here for the Indigenous communities, there's particularly funding for municipalities to improve their buildings. So what we're trying to do is help them choose what they might want to do as interventions. And while we were there, it's just the poor people that work there were frozen. So I'm like, okay, like we're gonna stick our head and see all of the places that are using energy. Let's go figure out why it's not working. And we spent an extra 2 hours puddling around just trying to figure it out. So it was done as part of an energy audit that was funded. So for them, it cost them nothing. For us, built a little goodwill. Probably a lot of goodwill. But well, Len, thank you for all being here today. I very much appreciated the questions and the feedback. Some very kind words. So I appreciate that from both of you. Thank you. I am always available on LinkedIn. I am happy to answer questions outside this format. Happy to develop relationships should you wish. I got a mentee today to add to my little stable of mentees, and I'm looking forward to seeing you out of this little room. So yeah, please reach out. Happy to connect. Yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you all in the future.